Hello, everyone. My name is Rebecca Dever, and I'm a criminal justice instructor at the North Lawrence Career Center in Bedford, Indiana. And I just want to welcome you to this session on teaching the future of law enforcement with hands-on learning. I hope that you will stick around until the end and log on or be redirected, I guess, to the live Q&A afterwards. I will be there. I will be happy to answer any and all questions that you have. I'm happy to brainstorm with you on how your program can implement some of the ideas that I'm getting ready to share with you. So if you'll give me just a moment, I'm going to share my screen with you so that you can see the PowerPoint that I have. It may take just a couple of seconds. But anyway, so I will go ahead and tell you a little bit about the program that I work with. So I am in a first-year program. So everything that I'm doing is brand new for the school. I teach at a school in rural Indiana. And there we go. Let's get this. There we are. Okay, hopefully you can see what I can see. You all, there we go. Yay, that worked. Sorry, I'm excited. I've been struggling with this today. So the school that I work for is, again, in rural Indiana. The student breakdown is about 70% male students and 30% female students. The majority of my students don't actually want to go into law enforcement, but we've had some changes in that this year. I have several students who would like to become attorneys, and a few who are interested in law enforcement. So the way that I break down my school year is in trimesters. And I teach a trimester on courts, a trimester on corrections, and then a trimester on law enforcement. So I'm really going to share with you all of the exciting hands-on activities that I did with my students during the law enforcement trimester. And one thing really in particular, which is our Law Enforcement Academy that I put together with local law enforcement. All right, here we go. So the Law Enforcement Academy, I worked with our Indiana State Troopers, the local police department, and conservation officers in order to put together a law enforcement academy that teamed up with all of the materials that I had access to on ICEV. So what I want to do with you today is go over the topics and tests that I had for my students, the order that I did the Law Enforcement Academy. I want to talk a little bit about notes with the students. We had a trimester project, and in addition, some of the training equipment that the school purchased. But if that's not something that you have access to, maybe I can present you with some ideas that could be a possibility, even if the finances aren't there for you to purchase equipment. All right, so let's talk Law Enforcement Academy. As I looked at the Law Enforcement Academy idea, I would say that it could be anything from a 3.5 week to a 9-week process. I chose to do mine over 9 weeks because that worked best for my schedule, but more importantly, it worked best for the schedule of the local law enforcement officers that were coming in to help the students. So there would be two options for you. You could opt to teach all of the material that you will be discussing in the Law Enforcement Academy before it starts, or you could do like I did, which is I taught material as the students were going to engage in labs. The way that I did notes with my students during the first and second trimester is that I used the ICEV notes and printed them off. Students filled them out. However, during the third trimester, what I chose to do was implement an additional element of being in law enforcement, which is being able to take notes at a scene and then access that information later on. So what I chose to do is have my students take their own notes. I no longer provided any of the ICEV notes for them. I still accessed the PowerPoint presentations and used those. And then the students were responsible for taking their own notes. And then in order to have students show their ability to access information that they'd already received, was I gave students open note exams. So they did as well as their notes allowed them to do. I would say that this was extremely effective. Now, I know not everybody is a fan of open notes exams, but for my class, it worked very well. Okay, let's cover some law enforcement topics that I implemented in our law enforcement academy. So first, the very first topic that I covered was written reports in law enforcement. And the reason that I did this is because later on, when I go over more topics, you will see that there was an opportunity for the students to actually fill out real written reports in law enforcement while they were learning about other topics. So that's why I covered that one first. Second was use of force. Third, search and seizure. Fourth, alcohol laws. Fifth, impaired driving laws. Sixth, arrest procedures. Excuse me. Seventh, vehicle traffic stops. Eighth, crowd management and control. And then ninth and 10th were just some fun things that we added in, which of course aren't ICEV topics, but the Indiana State Police have some very cool things that they were able to do with the students. And so we added in explosive ordnance disposal and scuba. So as we go along through the PowerPoint presentation, I have information about the things that I did. And then also, as you can see on this slide, images of my students participating in this part of the Law Enforcement Academy. So first of all, use of force, which of course is a hot button topic right now in the world of criminal justice. And I can't say enough about presenting this topic to your students. The gentleman in the picture to the left is one of our local conservation officers who is the defensive tactics trainer for this area of the state. And it was an opportunity for the students to ask questions that in any other situation, they may not have felt comfortable asking. Maybe not a topic that they felt comfortable asking their parents about, or something that they felt comfortable asking adult mentors about. So I can't stress enough how important I felt like this particular topic was to have students be able to talk to a local law enforcement officer about it. So what we did was a 2-day defensive tactics training. On the first day, the conservation officer taught them about different holds and weapon retention. He talked about cuffing and showed them different techniques for that. We did baton work and we did some takedowns. And then on the second day, having the knowledge of how to do those different things, students were given scenarios and then they actually created their own scenarios on what would they do, how would they use force in a given situation. We also were able to, like I said before, have a really frank conversation about excessive force. And the students left that with really an open mind about things that they had seen in, a 30-second TikTok video, and how understanding an entire situation helps us be able to make a better judgment. So that was extremely helpful. Here are a couple other images of, on the left, the conservation officer showing leading a student away. And then on the right-hand side, this was actually a scenario that the students came up with, which the student on the far left of the screen that you can hardly see, his scenario was if someone is trying to commit suicide by police. So it was a very interesting scenario and not one that I would have come up with. So it was really neat to see the creativity of the students when they're kind of just let on their own and say, hey, you get to come up with the topics. It's not me telling you what to do. So it was great. Oops. Okay, next is search and seizures. And during the search and seizure topic, we talked about vehicle, room, property, and person searches. The image here is one of our local police officers demonstrating a search. And again, I used the material from ICEV to teach search and seizure. And then this was that hands-on, get in there, do the work activities. So these two images on the left-hand side, we are lucky enough to have two old police cars. One's a sheriff's car and one is a local police department car donated to our school. Most of the time, the auto shop class uses it, but anytime we want to, we have access to it. So the image on the left, we hid things in a vehicle. Sometimes we didn't hide anything in a vehicle, which was fun to see the kids just search and search and search. And that's the reality, though, is that sometimes there isn't anything in a vehicle, even though you truly believe there's something in there. So it was a great lesson for them to learn. So the image on the right, we have kind of a storage room across from my classroom, and we hid drugs, obviously fake things, around the storage room because not everybody's house looks like HGTV, right? Sometimes you're going to go into a residence and it's going to be a mess and you're not even going to know where to start. So teaching the students the importance of having a pattern and having that planned out way to search a room or search a residence or search a property is so important. And so this gave them the opportunity to engage in that. Here are a couple of other pictures. I believe in these two images, they are searching for one of our blue guns, so a fake gun. And the picture, the students on the right found the gun, which was up in the steering column, and the students on the left were so close, but no cigar, they did not find it. And here is another image of practicing pat downs on each other. All right, alcohol laws and impaired driving. I'm just going to combine these two because that is what I did during the Law Enforcement Academy. So what we worked on mostly was standard field sobriety tests, and we played with Fatal Vision goggles. Now that's a name brand. We just called them drunk goggles. So here is an image of students on an obstacle course just to see what it was like. Could you do these things that seemingly are easy to do? Of course, we ran the course no drunk goggles, and then later ran it with drunk goggles. So it was very fun, and the students had such a good time. So here is the horizontal gaze nystagmus test that the Indiana State Police showed the students how to administer. And we had wonderful videos that you can find on YouTube that are close-ups of the eyeball to show what it is that you're actually looking for. So this was a very interesting activity, and students really had heard of it before, but never really understood what it was that they were looking at. And being able to show them that video and then be able to do this on their own was such a good time. But more fun came in the picture on the right. So we did all of the standard field sobriety tests. So the students on the right have their drunk goggles on and are doing the one-legged stand. And then in these two images, these students are doing the walk and turn, which I put those goggles on, and golly, it was hard. I had no idea how poor my balance was. So it was a very interesting activity, and one activity that I don't have on the PowerPoint slide because the video's a little too long is we had the students take off the goggles. We threw a tennis ball to them, and then they threw it back, and then we had them put on the goggles, threw a tennis ball to them, which most of them were able to catch. But then when they had to throw it back, of course, there is a distortion in where your view is. So most students threw the ball far off to the left. And so catching it where it landed and then having them take off their goggles to see where they'd actually thrown it was, I think, really eye-opening to them and helped them understand that, yeah, you may be able to catch the ball, but can you throw it? Can you throw it where you're supposed to really show that impact of intoxication on your ability to function. Next was arrest procedures. And so these two images show the students practicing cuffing. And I will talk a little bit about the handcuffs here in just a couple of minutes. So vehicle traffic stops. This previous screen was arrest procedures. So we went through all the different arrests, and then the next stop is vehicle traffic stops. Again, we used the cars. Students were in the rear car and approached the vehicle. Now, the gentleman that is in the driver's seat is one of the Indiana State Troopers, and he is out on the road. So he knows every scenario practically that can happen. And he just did an outstanding job coming up with different scenarios for the kids. Sometimes it was very simple and straightforward. He was very cooperative, no problems. Other times it was not. And students, after talking about vehicle traffic stops and understanding what they were supposed to do, then they're thrown into these scenarios that just absolutely tested their ability to critically think. So the kids had a lot of fun with this. There's another image. All right, crowd control and management. So this was such a good time and such a good time to engage with other classes. I mean, I know that this session is not about co-curricular learning. However, the image at the bottom on the right, the student that's being carried is actually not one of my students. Once the kids learned all about crowd control management and, like the picture on the left, learned the different layouts of the crowd control teams, then they practiced. Well, I didn't have enough students to practice. So we brought kids in from other classes to participate as our rioters or as our protesters, whatever the scenario called for. The students, sorry, I have a dog over here. I apologize. So the students were taught different carries when someone's being arrested. So the image on the right is them executing a carry on a student from the health sciences class. And so I'll just put out there, if you're not engaging with other classes, I would really encourage you to do that. Something that we did with our health sciences class is we switched classes for a couple of days. My students were CPR and first aid certified, and their students learned about fingerprinting and learned about, excuse me, my mind just went blank. I completely forgot, but I'll come back to it. So it was such a good time to engage with other classes. All right, explosive ordnance removal. So this, again, it's not an ICEV topic, but the kids love seeing stuff blow up. So if you can reach out to your local state police, I can't say enough how important it is to do that. But they brought their bomb sniffing dog. They brought all their equipment. They brought one of their robots and showed all of the students what it's really like. It isn't just 90 miles an hour 90% of the time. And unfortunately, with our students who are interested in law enforcement, a lot of times that's the case. They have this very skewed perspective of what the law enforcement field really is. And so showing them that, yeah, there's all this really cool stuff, but then you have to write, 17 reports about it. So that's where every time the students did something, law enforcement officers made sure to talk to them about the realities of the job. And here is one of my students putting on the bomb suit and then trying to do things in the bomb suit. So it was very easy for him to get down on the ground, but then to get back up was a different story. So here are a couple of pictures of that, which I promise you ended up being put out on Snapchat. All right, and then scuba. So this was something that quite a few of my students were actually interested in, being competitive swimmers. And actually the state trooper who was presenting on scuba, he was a competitive swimmer in high school also. So this was something that one of my students who's a competitive swimmer is really interested in being a conservation officer. And so to hear about scuba and understand that scuba in Indiana is not like scuba in the Keys. So, not being able to see your hand in front of your face, if it's, a foot away, that's the reality of scuba in Indiana. Handling drugs in law enforcement was another topic that we covered, and evidence collection. All of this was really integral in teaching the kids the dangers of handling drugs when you're in law enforcement or really in any field in the criminal justice system. And really driving home how dangerous a lot of the drugs are. I mean, all drugs are dangerous, but how dangerous to handlers a lot of the drugs are out there now. Okay. One of the things that I do every trimester is my students have a trimester project. So for the law enforcement trimester, I did a lab binder with them. And this is where written reports in law enforcement came into play. So their binder consisted of the lesson vocabulary handouts and any additional lesson handouts that I just printed off ICEV. Any in-class lab assignments, which most of those I got off of ICEV. They're under either projects or something else like that. And then what I have the students do is do their own lab summaries. So every one of those topics that I just went over with you, the students wrote up their own lab summaries, what they thought before it started, what they learned, any misconceptions that they had, were their misconceptions validated, anything that happened that was unexpected for them. Did they learn something that they never thought would be associated with that topic? And then, of course, I want to know what their favorite part was. So this was a very easy thing for the students to do that had pretty significant impact on their ability to communicate what they saw, which helped train them in writing those probable cause affidavits. So that was something that when we did the traffic stops, they then had to write probable cause affidavits about it. So having the ability to teach them something and then have such a real life experience and then write the report about it is something that I can't stress enough is so important for students to engage in. Some of the training equipment that I had for my students that some things were purchased and some things were just donated. So bulletproof vests, for example, our local sheriff's department had some expired vests and they just donated them to the class. The kids absolutely loved being able to put on the whole gear, right? So they had a vest on, they had duty belts with holsters and blue guns and handcuffs. And the handcuffs that I was able to get are training cuffs, which are just nice because students can just rotate their wrist out of them and they just open up. We had batons, fake pepper spray, tasers, flashlights, the whole 9 yards. If you do not have the funds to be able to purchase equipment like this, I would strongly encourage you to reach out to your local law enforcement and ask them if they have things that are expired, right? Do you have expired vests? Do you have any old duty belts? Asking an engineering class at your CTE school, if you have one, if they have 3D printers, ask them to 3D print your blue guns. Things like that. There are so many options that you have if funding is an issue for you. I do want to touch on a couple other topics that aren't directly law enforcement related, but I incorporated them in our law enforcement trimester. So some of the forensic topics that we talked about were fingerprint and impression analysis, tool mark analysis, and then the evidence collection sections. And what we did was, because our local law enforcement do fingerprinting, we were able to look through the fingerprint kits in the trunks of their cars, right? This is actually something that you do. Not every small town has a CSI, right? They may have to wait for someone to get there from a couple of towns over. So being able to do fingerprinting with the kids, of course, they thought it was amazing. It did make a giant mess. Heads up, if you've never worked with fingerprint powder before, it's a mess. But it was just such a good time, and they were amazed at their fingerprints. We all know that no two fingerprints are the same, but them being able to really explore their own fingerprints was a really cool experience for them. Tool mark analysis was something as simple as going to the Dollar Tree and getting some Play-Doh, and then going to the auto shop and grabbing a tire iron, and then going over to the construction class and grabbing some other tools from them and going at it. The kids love this. It was not long after spring break. So frustration at being back at school gave them an opportunity to let that out. Evidence collection. So this is a great suggestion on ICEV on projects to do with your students. The picture on the left is what my classroom looked like after I vandalized it. And everything is purple and white, excuse me. Everything is purple and white because our rival school is purple and white. So I told the kids that seniors from the other school had apparently broken into the school and wreaked havoc on our class. I wrote things on the board, like the other school seniors rock and all that. So what really happened is, of course, myself and 3 other teachers trashed the classroom. And I made sure that their fingerprints were on glass bottles. The students then had to dust for prints. I had lots of comparison prints because really I just went around to all the teachers in the school and had them give me their fingerprints. So the students dusted for prints. They compared those prints to all the other prints, and they had to determine who their suspects were and who was innocent. So this was really an interesting topic to do before law enforcement came, so that the kids were able to ask questions and figure out what's really real. What's it really like to do this stuff? What's it really like to have to be so cautious about where you step and what you do? So this was exciting and they loved that. Here's more evidence collection. All right. So that's all that I have time for. Please make sure that you stick around after this is over for our live Q&A. I put my contact information on there. If you have any additional questions, just so you know, you will automatically be awarded for attending this session. And at the end of the conference, you'll get like a digital certificate noting how many sessions that you attended. So thank you so much again for joining me. And I hope to see you right after this at the live Q&A.